Good afternoon, everyone. This is Stuart Cohen from IGI Cyber Labs. Thank you very much for joining today's SMB Educational Series webinar on how to build a risk-based cybersecurity program on a budget. Even if you don't have any IT or security people on your team, we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about if you have one person or if you have a couple of people, how you could address those needs. We'll get started in just a minute. We're just waiting for additional people to log into today's session. Thanks so much for joining us, and I'll be back to you shortly. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Stuart Cohen. I'm the president of IGI Cyber Labs. I want to thank you very much for attending today's session. We are excited to have the two panelists we have on today's call. Just as a reminder, this is part of our SMB educational series to educate SMB owners and C-level executives that run small businesses, most of which don't have an IT person or a security person. Some have maybe one person, with providing them a few simple steps to help them get started with all of the ransomware attacks that are coming their way. What are some things they can do? Just as a bit of background, we started this series off a number of months ago with NIST, Ron Ross, and with Tony Sager from the Center of Information Security, talking about CIS 18 and a couple of things small businesses could do to be just a little bit more compliant. We had the folks from MIT, Sloan School of Business, talking about some of their research and some education and training that they recommended small businesses do. We've had Brian Hurd from Aon talking about cyber insurance and how businesses can get ready for cyber insurance. We've had a number of MSPs on talking about how you can use a MSP or a managed service provider, managed security service provider, or vCISO to help you with the issues that you face as you begin to look at, improving the organization, improving the integrity of your systems, updating the confidentiality of your systems, and certainly if you end up in a risk situation or attack situation, how do you get immediate or close to immediate business continuity plans in place so you can be back up and running, because once again, it's all about business continuity, and to be able to run your business. Our two panelists today, Naomi Buckwalter and Jim Ambrosi, will join us in just a second, and I will let them introduce themselves. But before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping rules that I'd just like you to be aware of. If we could go to the next slide. We do want to keep this interactive. In fact, you're going to see we're going to start today's session with a few of the pre-submitted questions that have come in over the GoToWebinar registration page. We'd like you to submit questions in the question line or in the chat box. We'd like to get to your questions. This is about being market-driven, being about our audience-driven, and answering the questions you have. If you do have some follow-on questions, submit them as part of our LinkedIn events page. We'll make sure through LinkedIn and through our communities, we're addressing those questions as well. It's a question that always comes up. The recordings will be available. They'll be available on YouTube for a rebroadcast. That'll probably be out early next week. We'll also have some slides that we may or may not get to today, but in either case, we'll distribute those slides to you. We'd appreciate it if you signed in on LinkedIn and you followed us on LinkedIn. We have a session coming up in a couple of weeks from the head of small business at CISA, part of DHS, talking about the CISA Essentials program and what's there to provide for small businesses. You'll also see we have one from an MSP executive coming up the end of the month, talking about how MSPs can help run your business and help support your revenue objectives and your bottom line objectives. and how MSPs can help business leaders. And then we'll have another one coming up from the CIS 18 group and some things they're doing to help small businesses get to compliance. We also have sessions coming up on remote and hybrid workforces and how that affects small businesses. And when you have people working remote and people working in the office, how do you handle that? How do you handle it from a security standpoint, and a number of different dynamics with it? So I just want to thank everybody for attending today's session. Just as a reminder, put your questions in the chat box or in the question box. We'll do our best to get to them. And with that, I will I will turn it over to Naomi to introduce herself. And then we'll go to Jim, and then we'll address the first few questions that were submitted in advance. Naomi?
Hey, thanks, Stuart. Hey, everyone. I'm Naomi Buckwalter. I'm a Ciso. I'm also the Director of Information Security and IT at a company called Beam Technologies, or Beam Dental. We're located in Columbus, Ohio. I love SMBs. I've been in the SMB space for about 5 years now as a security leader, and in technology and security for over 20 years. And yes, I am old. And I will say the reason why you're here is you care about your business enough, and you know that cybersecurity can take your business down. In fact, we have plenty of stories in the security world that will say a company existed one day and did not exist the next. And we know that you're here because you don't want to be one of those statistics or the headline. And you also want security to be a business enabler and also have positive ROI. Yes, I did say that security can have positive ROI. It's not just a cost center. So put your questions in the chat or in the questions box, please, on how we can best do that. I have built security programs from scratch for small and mid-sized businesses, ranging from a 25-person company all the way to a 300-person company. So I'm well aware of the issues that go on in your business and how to actually do it cheaply using the technology you currently have. I'll pass it over to Jim.
Thanks, Naomi. Great to be here with you, and welcome everyone. Jim Ambrosini here. I'm a virtual Ciso with IGI, and I have about 20 years or so experience, mostly from the consulting world in information technology, including running a practice specifically designed for cybersecurity for the SMB market. And then before that, I was a systems developer, and going way, way back. But many, many years experience in InfoSec and cyber, well aware of the challenges in the SMB market, and happy to be participating today.
Well, Naomi, Jim, thanks so much. Why don't we move right into a couple of the issues of the day. Jim, maybe you could spend a moment talking about this slide, and then we'll get to the pre-submitted questions.
Yeah, so this slide comes from, I think we have the source below. I think it was from a Verizon data breach report. But every industry and every market has certain nuances in terms of who the threat actors are or the most common forms of attack. For example, actually prior to coming to IGI, I was an information security and risk professional at a very large bank that had a very different perspective in terms of who the threat actors were, right? You're dealing more with like nation state organized crime. For the SMB market, it's very different. And it's actually a pretty close mix, as you can see, if I know it's a little bit difficult to read, but it's a split between internal and external, right? So the internal threats is about 44% of the breaches, according to this study. External was 55%. For larger organizations, just to give perspective, like for example, when I work for the large bank, probably like 80 to 90% were all external, right? So there's a little bit of a mix. Also, in terms of the motivation is always going to be pretty much the same across industries. It's generally financial, right? They want to obtain data and sell it, or they want to put you hostage, let's say, for like ransomware attacks, et cetera. In some cases, it's just people messing around or corporate espionage, et cetera. And then I'll just briefly talk about some of the patterns of attack. Again, they're different by industry, but what's interesting in terms of from the SMB market, we see a lot more of that last one, which is miscellaneous errors. Those were breaches that didn't fit some of the normal categories of, let's say, system hacking or a web application attack. These were more someone fell for a a very unsophisticated phishing scam or sent an email to the wrong person, or if they were doing some in-house development, didn't do proper securitization of that asset. So, and again, a lot of that is driven by the lack of resources or revenue you have to put against those things. So again, these were just some basic things. And Naomi, anything to add to this from your perspective?
Well, I just want to stress that insider threat is real. So even though you think you trust your people and you love to give them all the trust in the world, you still have to have that little person on your shoulder that just says, just in case, a lot of fraud happens. And how does that happen? Insider threat. So really be aware of this. Don't just assume it's going to be a hacker living in a basement in their mom's house, right? That's the yesteryear. Today, it's a lot spread across all over the place. It doesn't matter if you're unimportant or you don't think a hacker is going to be interested in you. The fact that you are on the internet makes you a target because someone's interested in the challenge, most likely, or someone inside your company is trying to make financial things happen for them.
So with that, let's kick it off. Really, the very first question. What are some examples of things that bring the most value when a small business or nonprofit has a limited budget?
Now, you want to go first?
That sounds like you had an answer for that. Go ahead, Jim.
Okay. So there's a couple of things. One thing I did want to mention, and actually I think I have a slide. Actually, if we could just jump ahead a couple of slides, and then we'll flip back. But the one point I wanted to bring up, there you go, is this one. If you remember anything, just remember when we talk about strategies and perspectives and ROI and methods, there's no technical solution. And I want to be clear about that because particularly in the SMB market, from my experience, we get asked a lot of these sort of vendor nuance questions. Well, is this endpoint security mechanism better than this one? What antivirus should I be using? What firewalls do you recommend? Is this practice better than this? It's really it's like anything else, right? Anybody who has been in either systems development or any type of big or even small project, technology is a piece of the solution. So you have to just think through it. I just wanted to make that kind of broad disclaimer that no matter what you have in place, there is no panacea. There is absolutely no silver bullet, especially in the SMB market. So now let's go back to the question and we'll talk about a couple of, let's say, bang for the buck. So most value. Well, I'll throw out one for starters. I think that a big bang for the buck is good old user awareness. Because in the SMB market, particularly, I found them more susceptible to some of the even less sophisticated phishing scams that happen, or how to recognize when an email is not from your boss or the CEO or the CFO asking you for confidential information. So one of the biggest, I think, bangs for the buck, and in terms of adding a tremendous, and this would go for any corporation, but particularly for the SMB, is user awareness. Understanding what it looks like, how to recognize what a phishing email. I'll just throw this out there quickly. I had a client recently that was getting phished through, and this is actually happening, it's now a pervasive threat that's happening all across the country, where people are getting an email that says it's from the CEO or the CFO from a company and says, hey, I need you for something. You got a second? Send me your phone number. And they send them, some people send them the phone number and they get something back that asks them to do certain things or send certain things. Now, fortunately, people could recognize that. Hopefully, but there are still a lot of companies. In fact, some of our clients were actually phished in this particular way. So again, it's understanding, the parameters of how you interact with business. Like, would your CEO or CFO ever text you and say, hey, send money here, or go down and get this for me, or send me this file? And also being able to recognize threats. So I'll leave it there with one, and we'll go to Naomi, and then we'll kind of go back and forth.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because there are two types of insider threat, isn't there, Jim? There's the unintentional, which is what you just described in your story. And then there's the malicious one. This is a person who actually wants to try to defraud the company, right? And there are so many stories where a new hire, and research has shown the people who have just joined the company is more likely to fall for a phishing attempt, because either they don't have the user awareness, thank you, Jim, or they just want to please the boss, right? They got an email from the boss. Wow, I need to reply back to her right away so I can buy these gift cards, right? Like, so that happens quite often. So if you want to focus on anything, user awareness to get rid of that unintentional insider threat is a large part of why these things happen sometimes. Hey, I just got a call from my other boss and they want access to our cloud environment. Oh, okay, I'll just set them up right there, right? Like, those are the kind of things. They don't mean to do it. They're not going to be intentionally trying to harm your company, but they are a new hire. They want to please everyone. They don't know what anything is. They don't know who is who, right? So those are the kind of threats in your threat model that you want to focus on, who could actually do harm for your company. So I'm glad you brought that up, Jim. That's an excellent point.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of other things, I'll call it some basics, right? So what are the things that bring the most value? So when I think about adding value from cyber, it's something that could be done very quickly and effectively, and that doesn't cost a lot of money, but it's still going to offer a massive amount of protection in the grand scheme of things, right? Cybersecurity it's a monetary component, right? Obviously, unlimited resources. The more money you throw at things, of course, you could, obviously increase your capabilities there. But again, for an SMB, you want to be practical. Some of the other basic things, right, are around just access management and using long passwords. I've seen with the SMBs a lot of executives that are, let's say, not that they are still allowed to use very weak passwords, or stuff that may have been acceptable back in the 1990s of 4 and 6 character passwords, et cetera. The most important factor that we're finding out now is actually password length, right? So the longer the passwords, you could implement this like this on really any device. A phrase or something, don't use we all know this stuff. Don't use your son or daughter's name or your birthday and this and that, because all that stuff can be obtained, right? So again, putting some basic level multi-factor authentication is another one. You have this, you could use it for Office 365, a lot of, even on some of your personal accounts, if you're using Gmail or O365 or even Yahoo at some small business, you can put, and even on your personal accounts too, add two-factor authentication. It takes you from here to here with really no real increase in cost. I'll get into a couple of other ones in a minute. But first, I want to turn it over to you, Naomi.
I almost have nothing to add. You're doing great, Jim. I'm going to subscribe to your newsletter. Here's an interesting one. If you in a separate browser, I'm going to challenge you guys to do this. There's a website out there that actually checks to see if your passwords, your emails, and your accounts have been hacked or pwned. So go to haveibeenpwned.com. It's a free website, and it's super secure. It's actually run by a security researcher named as a Troy Hunt. I always get his name wrong. It's a Troy Hunt or Tony Hunt. I always forget. Nice Australian guy, but he runs a service for free. He takes a look at all the breaches out there and he maps it back to email addresses. So go ahead, haveibeenpwned.com in a separate browser, if you will. Just type in your email address. You will be surprised at what has been put out there. And once you realize you have been pwned, you actually want to change that password wherever you use it. Again, not only using long passphrases, but using a password manager, something else to help you remember long passwords or passphrases. Never reuse the same passphrase in 2 different sites, right? Always have a unique passphrase. Don't worry so much about rotating it as much. That's actually a requirement that's no longer a thing. So you do want to keep them updated if you can, but the whole point is, like Jim said, longer passphrases the better. Encryption algorithms, a lot harder to get those hashes out, right? So you want to actually get long passphrases, 2FA when you can, and never reuse your password. So go to haveibeenpwned.com, PWNED.com, and put in your email address, see what you see.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because actually I put mine in, and all of my emails were pawned, and are out there. And actually, it was because of that, of seeing that. This was years ago that I put two-factor authentication on my own personal Gmail account, and lo and behold, years later, I got these unauthorized login attempts from, and I traced the IP address, and it was somewhere back in like Bangladesh, and they couldn't get in because I had two-factor authentication. Had I not done that, my account would have been compromised and just another headache, right, which we don't want. I'll just talk.
Hey, Jim?
Yeah.
So I want to bring up a point and then a question that we just got in from the audience. So, Chuck Brooks, kind of a renowned security industry insights person, he made the comment that, you really ought to focus on a couple of simple things, right? You ought to implement multi-factor authentication. You ought to do a little bit of education and training, and you ought to at least find out what devices are on your network and which ones are exploitable. That would be a good place to start.
Yep.
And then Alan Alford in one of our other sessions, and Helen from Duo talked about same thing, kind of multi-factor authentication as well as education. And there's some very inexpensive educational and training opportunities out there. And then she said, what, you ought to find out more than what devices are exploitable, but you ought to be alerted immediately to any new device that shows up. And it was an interesting thing. They said those are 3 or 4 things. And the reason I bring that up is multi-factor authentication comes up all the time. We just got a question from somebody that said, we saw some kickback against using two-factor authentication because employees would have to use their personal devices and would demand compensation. What do we do to encourage that need? And I had not heard anybody say, I didn't want to use two-factor authentication because my device would be used. But I'm curious if you've heard that. And Naomi, I have a feeling you're kind of straight over tackle. I believe you're going to have a great answer to that.
I do. I have seen that. People really want to separate their work and personal life. I get it. So what you can do a couple things. You don't need a phone. You can actually purchase something called hard tokens or security tokens. They're physical devices that you can plug into their work computer, and they say, hey, you want to log in? Give me your thumb or push this button or whatever. So it's a physical piece of hardware. Put in your USB drive, and when they're prompted for that 2FA, it's their fingerprint, or it's a press of a button, or it's the near field device, which is actually just, it's close by, it exists, that's all they need to do. So there's ways around it, but not, just so you know, not every 2FA enrollment supports those kinds of things. So you want to be careful, like the bigger things like Google and stuff like that, they will support security keys and security tokens, but not everything. So in some cases, you're just going to have to say, hey, here's our policy in our employee handbook. You're going to have to use your own device for certain things. And if you decide not to do that, maybe you're not the right fit for this company. And you want to put a hard line in the sand. What's more important? Your device that you want to just type in a code real quick, or your company's revenue, right? Like really balance that risk for yourself. You want to keep your employees full-time happy and all the things and tell you what to do, or do you want to protect your company's revenue? That was a little harsh.
Well, it comes back to, right, I always talk about, when I was the CEO of another company, right, the things that were important to me was the confidentiality of our data, the integrity of our systems, and if something happened, did we have an ability to return to work rapidly, because it was all about growing the top line and doing it in a profitable fashion that made sense to stay customer driven. And it wasn't about what security do I need to implement to make sure those things happen. It was always those things top of mind. Jim, I'll ask you this question first, just so Naomi, maybe you can put in the chat the website for checking the passwords, because we've had a couple of people ask for that. But we did get, what kinds of things have you seen that promote phishing awareness the best? And are there campaigns or training that you think decrease the number of breaches?
Yeah, so one of the best ways to increase phishing awareness is to actually do a phishing campaign. And for example, if you're using Office 365, there's some configurations where you could send some fake phishing emails out there and test the employees. You could hire a firm to do it. I think you have to do that type of stress testing. Personally, I found that it's a combination of 2 things. It's doing, let's say, a standard type of employee awareness type training, which is you could purchase these or have a consultant give it, or someone knowledgeable in the company could go through, talk about some war stories, talk about some best practices, and give some concrete examples, especially how to recognize a phishing attack, and then talk about what happens when companies did get phished. We've seen some horrible, you could even read the news. Companies were shut down, some went out of business, some took weeks to come back. It is absolutely brutal. But I really think that you need to have both a person talking about actual, giving kind of like traditional training, and then actually stress testing that by doing a phishing campaign. And while they're at that training, this is what works the best, to say, hey, we've been sending out these fake emails to you all over the last couple of months, and let's take a look at the results. And you're not calling anyone out on the call specifically, but you'll show, and believe me, you'll get a lot of people. Even people in the security field can get scammed. And they're getting more and more sophisticated. That's why you have to kind of keep this up going all the time, at least every year.
Naomi, maybe you want to comment further about that, but I would like to get to the question about how do you balance cost, budget, time with improving cyber resiliency. And you may want to address that, and maybe a little bit about training at the same time.
Yeah, this is a loaded question for me, because what I usually do is, depending on your business, what you want to protect, the way you're going to balance risk is with any kind of business risk, right? How do you measure risk across your business? Like, is a competitor opening up down the street? How do you balance that risk with all the other things that you do? Do you try to put them out of business, or do you work better on your products in order to beat them right down the street? So just like any business risk, security is a business risk. It is owned by the entire business. It is risk management. That's what information security is. So just like how you would manage risk for your business, consider information security another type of business risk. So I'll just caveat with that. Another thing that I do suggest for really small, like 25, 50 people or fewer, really consider hiring a vCISO. I know I'm actually not taking new clients, but there are plenty of people I would recommend, and they only charge like $100 an hour. You can only just contract them for 10 hours a month just to make sure that they can talk to your customers or potential customers. I do that. I go on sales calls to just talk to customers and be like, hey, our security is pretty great. I help win sales. Like, that is a great positive ROI for the company. Like, that's the kind of stuff that you want to start generating interest in from your customer base also. So not only are you saving the potential risk and losing revenue, you're also generating interest, and your customers are excited because they can invest in a secure product, and that's what they want to see. Good businesses will always have great products, and great products always have great security. So consider that angle also. You're investing in your company, you're investing in your products. It's how you actually do your own business risk. So I can't tell you how it is, but that's what I see a lot of successful companies doing.
Yeah, I just want to add, and those are great points. I want to add that years ago, security could have been viewed as an enabler. In other words, you could take a certain company, and because they were more secure, there was a built-in level of trust. Today, it's really almost table stakes. If you're in business, any kind of business, if you're a sole proprietor or you're a 10-person company, or if you're a multi-billion-dollar company, there's an expectation that from the customers that their transactions are going to be secure, private, timely, etc. And so cyber security directly influences that. So when you're thinking about the budget and what to apply, when you're thinking through the risk scenario, think about, well, what could go wrong? How long could we go down if we were, let's say, attacked and had ransomware, or they took out our system, or if we were breached and had to disclose this? I had a lot of, at one time, some of the companies that I were doing business with were actually private equity companies that didn't have a lot of data, right? So they were kind of like, we do business on phone and email and stuff like that. But the question that I asked them was, well, what happens if you were, regardless of what data they got, if you were breached and it was on in their case, the Wall Street Journal, or it got around, what would that do to your business? And it's like, oh, yeah. So again, there's the reputational impact. is almost equally important depending on the type of business you're in.
So let's get to security gaps that could impact revenue. I mean, this is always a fascinating topic to me, and this gets to the heart of, you're in business to grow a business, and whether it's a for-profit or nonprofit, it's all about serving your customers and delighting your customers and growing your business. So let's talk a little bit about, what are the security gaps that could impact, your revenue or ability to support your customers. Naomi?
I'll have to think about this one. I want a good answer, so I'm going to pass it to Jim.
All right. Well, let's talk about, there's a couple of ways that you could think about this in terms of revenue. So one would be if you were prevented from doing business, right? Let's say if you were a small manufacturing company and you went down because of a cyber attack or a system outage, you can't produce, right? That could be a problem. There's another way to think of this too, which is if you were the victim of ransomware, which could be a lot of money, right? I mean, if it's, if they said, well, send us $1 million or whatever the fee could be, 25,000, 250, $1 million, whatever, they try to scale it, but it would be a significant amount of money. That's, you have to now pretty much cut a check if you were sustained to that, if you succumbed actually to that piece of attack. So, one thing I'll just throw out two kind of quick things in terms of gaps. I would say think about data and think about your business processes and think about some of the risks and what would happen to a particular event. Like if that data got out, right, what would that mean from you, again, reputation standpoint, cost of a breach, et cetera. The other thing is, I think that there's a huge gap that exists with cyber resiliency and backups, right? Basic backups. I can't even tell you, I've been doing this a long time, and I've seen companies where we go in to audit them, and I'm like, how are you? Oh, we do backups, we do this, we do that, and then we go in and we find out that they weren't even working, and no one ever looked at them, right? So audit your backups. Make sure that you have multiple copies, whether you're using the cloud, on-prem, or a combination. Make sure you take a lot of backups and you can get to it and you have one secure copy offline somewhere, because in worst case scenarios, and it doesn't even have to be a cyber attack, it could be a natural disaster or something else, that may be the only way that you're going to get back to normal.
Oh, I love that answer.
Before you comment, I just, I have to say, we have a session coming up with Eric Poza, who's the CEO of an MSP, and all he talks about is the impact an MSP can have on a business owner and an SMB leader's ability to drive revenue, the ability to be more profitable, how an MSP can be an assistant to the senior executives of a small, even very small business, but help them offload the things they do so they can focus on what's important, and it's their business and their customers. So I know that comes up in another month, but I wanted to at least make a comment about that because I think people will find that conversation interesting, and hopefully there'll be some follow-on questions to it. But, just coming back to you, Naomi, any thoughts specifically on the security gaps and how you'd think about that?
Yeah, Jim mentioned something great. So he actually said, what kind of things can attack your business? Really think about your threats, right? And the official term for that, by the way, is threat modeling. So if you want free resources, they're amazing out there. We do such a great thing in the security community where we create free resources for everyone and anyone. So take a look at threat modeling. There's different frameworks, different questions you can use depending on what your company does, right? And so you're answering two things essentially. What are my threats and what's the impact that that threat can have to my business? So if you can answer what kind of threats are out there, you know how much money you want to spend on protecting certain things, because it doesn't make sense to spend $1 million protecting something that's only worth $20,000 to you, right? So you really want to start thinking critically about what resources, what people, technology, process, whatever, how much energy you're going to spend on protecting a certain part of your business, whatever it is, and how much you're willing to put into that, because now you know who is actually going to attack you, what the likelihood of that attack is going to be, and then how much it might actually take you to get it back up and running. So those are kind of like those three things. In threat modeling, there's frameworks, there's questionnaires out there that can help you out there. You don't need to hire a vCISO. You don't have to spend any money doing a security audit. You can do this today, and you can do it for free.
To that point, do you spend a lot of time, in your day-to-day life talking about, what systems are the crown jewels of the organization and what systems need to be separated so the devices aren't vulnerable, they can't be exploited, and the attacks won't happen that way? Do you spend a lot of time with small businesses helping them segment, if you will, the value or quality of the data?
Yeah, so every company might not be a SaaS company or a software company, but every company is a technology company, right? Like if you're operating in 2021, even if you're a cookie manufacturer, you've got a website, you've got back-end systems, you've got financial data, right? So like every company is a technology company. So every company has data. And what you want to do is think about your data and what is critical to your company and how much you need to protect that. Put the number of resources, give it a price. Everything should come back to revenue and to cost to the business, right? When you start thinking in dollars, it makes it so obvious. You're like, oh, my critical data is this, and it's worth $1 million to us. If it goes down today, it's going to take $1 million to get back, right? That's how much money it costs for you. Then you say, how much am I willing to lose? Or how much do you think I'm willing to spend to get it back, right? And so now you're starting to think, how much am I willing to spend to protect this data, to keep my livelihood, to keep my employees' families fed, right? Like start asking these questions, and it's all out there on the internet. Google threat modeling, Google, risk calculation, like all those things, those calculators are out there for you today for free, and do that. I can't stress that hard, enough, because if you know what your assets are, what your data is, what you're trying to protect, you can do so much more.
Jim?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I mean, I think it's, having the knowledge is key in this space, right? And we do spend a lot of time helping clients, let's say triage or be able to build walls around virtual walls of greater protection around the key data. And depending on, as companies grow, I will just add this, one of the mistakes that I've seen them make is when they try to treat all data and all systems with the same criticality. Listen, it works fine when you're smaller. You only have like maybe email, a couple of web servers, things like that. As companies grow sometimes, and they have to now invest money into, okay, if something happened, what can we really live without, and what can we need, like literally it could be seconds or minutes. That's where the investment comes in. And sometimes when we looked at what's like business continuity plans, there's a thing called the business impact assessment. And one of the worst things we've seen is when companies say, show us a list of all your critical systems and what's the priority. And like, here you go. And everything's a priority. And again, it could be fine if you have a few systems, but as they grow, there's a different resource requirement and cost associated with bringing up, again, the crown jewels. So you always want to think through, what do I really, really need, like now, within hours, within minutes, et cetera. I had a company, they were technically a small business, although they said that they were in the oil and gas. They actually monitored, they were non-for-profit, but they monitored oil and gas flow to help set the and do analysis, which was ultimately used in the price of oil on the market. They were small business, okay, SMB technically, maybe like 300 or 400 people, but they said if their systems were down for minutes, it could materially affect the price of oil, right? Again, this is an SMB, right? But that system, that's an extreme example, but I'm just saying, obviously, all of the resources were in those particular systems to keep them, up and running and protected. So it's just an example.
Let me move on to something slightly different. We got a question about cyber insurance, and it reminded me, Brian Hurd, when he was on one of our webinars, talked about, before you do anything as it relates to cyber insurance or cyber liability, you need to be able to and it gets back to this question, you know, where are your test systems? Where are your production systems? Where are your development systems? And then what sort of regimented approach and documented approach do you have to supporting each one of those? Because before you have that in place and before you know where your vulnerabilities are and you know where your devices are, you can't really apply for insurance. So he spent a lot of time talking about what you need to do to be ready, documented, regimented requirements and policies and procedures to be implemented. But, you know, for companies that don't have time to do that or are hoping to avoid some of that, do you have any suggestions for both either the selection or the purchasing of cyber insurance for SMBs or for nonprofits? And do you get in now before it goes up dramatically, or do you wait?
Well, let me just, if I can take this. This is timely because actually it was maybe a week and a half ago. I was actually on an insurance panel with some leaders in the insurance field. So I got the firsthand information, and it blew my mind because what they said was, these were insurance carriers and brokers. So this is their words, right? Not mine. It is incredibly difficult to get cyber insurance. Remember, it was almost like if anybody was in this market for long-term care insurance, anybody that has a policy from like 15 years ago, it like covers everything. But like now, the riders and extras, it's almost like, what am I even paying this for? Cyber insurance is a little bit like that. The fees have actually tripled and the premiums have come down. So, right, so someone who had, let's say, a $10 million premium or $5 million, now they're paying 3 times more to get half. And here's the thing, they're being so selective. In fact, Stu, we had a client recently who couldn't even get cyber insurance, right, because they couldn't answer the questions correctly. So they're actually giving them a questionnaire, and it's typically 2. And I'll give you a hint on something. One of them is basically like cyber protect. You know, do you have firewalls? Do you have this? Do you have this? Blah, 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 blah. They have another one that some of the larger ones are doing, which is around ransomware. And according to the experts on this one panel, they said that's the key one because that attack is so prevalent. If you don't have the ransomware protection, and they're looking at, you know, user awareness training, you know, vulnerability management, and resiliency, you will probably not even be able to get a policy.
Naomi, you're nodding your head.
That's because I agree with everything. I think the trend in industry and cybersecurity insurance industry is to not cover ransomware because it just costs way too much money because the companies aren't doing their backups, they aren't testing their backups. They're just going and saying, hey, we're just going to pay it and get our data back. But don't forget, once you get your data, the key to decrypt everything, you still have to like set the data back up, right? Get all the systems back up running. So there's an additional cost past just paying for the ransomware key, right? So no one really thinks about that. I will say though, if you want a free audit, like ask for cybersecurity insurance company to just come in and give you a quote, because they're going to go like, oh yeah, let's take a look at your security posture, right? And then you get a free audit essentially. So if you want a free audit, that's kind of what I want to do. But cybersecurity insurance is a good idea, but again, you have to be mature enough at a certain level. You can't just go out and buy it. Right. Like that's not going to happen.
Yep.
Yeah, there's all sorts of horror stories about people who have been attacked, people who had insurance, people who went to claim against their insurance and then didn't have a chance to actually get reimbursed because their policies and premiums didn't quite cover what it was that happened to them because of 3 different scenarios.
You know what's really insidious now? The ransomware gangs are so smart. They actually investigate the companies first. They do something called open source intelligence, OSINT, on the companies they're attacking. And they say, how much rider do they have, right? Like, how much can we actually charge them that they can pay? They're smart now. Or they're like, what's their revenue numbers for the year? Okay, we're going to ask for that much. So they target companies that they can find information on. And they're like, we know they're going to be able to afford 50,000. We're going to ask for 50,000, right? Like that's insidious.
Yeah, and they're also nice enough to give you instructions on how to set up a Bitcoin account to make sure that it goes. You know, they're like, we don't know. Oh, here, just follow these instructions. Here,
Yeah.
step
But
by
man,
step.
they go for that money. They really do.
Yeah.
And it's funny because they have like full customer service now. So you can go back and forth in the chat and be like, hey, you know, we can't afford 50,000, but can we negotiate? Like you can negotiate with the criminals. It's hilarious. You don't want to find yourself in that situation, by the way. Contact a professional.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we're not ready to announce it today, but we are actually working with a company that does cyber liability and provides cyber liability for small businesses. And it'll be a great thing that we can talk about in the future. So stay tuned, stay on our LinkedIn event page. We'll have more about that later, but we're working with a company that provides cyber liability for very small businesses and nonprofits. So we have a couple of poll questions that we're going to put up while we conclude over the next 15 minutes. So if we could have the first poll question come up, and at the same time they're answering the question, just for everybody's benefit who haven't been on our webinars in the past, we ask these 3 poll questions on every single one of them. It gives us a chance to compare and contrast the audiences. What are the important things about them, and how do we provide the right kind of education for them? With that, you know, Naomi, you and I talked about for a few minutes before we got started about the book that you recommended small businesses take a look at. You know, Gary's a friend of ours. Maybe you want to spend a little bit of, you know, talking a little bit about that book and some of the things that people could get from that book.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Gary Hayslip. It's a green book out there. Hopefully it's not mirror imaged, but it's called the Essential Guide for Cybersecurity for SMBs. There it is. There's a couple hundred pages here, and it's all about how to build information security from scratch for an SMB and really targeting what's important for most small and mid-sized businesses and really getting to the brass tacks, right? Not going through all the fluff. Everyone knows about the fluff and the red tape and the process, but really managing risk for a business. And that's essentially what information security is. It's risk management and how to do that really well in a small and mid-sized business. Again, Gary Hayslip, a friend of this group's, the Essential Guide to Cybersecurity for SMBs. He writes several others. It's called the Ciso Desk Reference Guide, but it's written in such a way that anyone can understand this. It's not written for security professionals. So go ahead and take a look at that. There's also plenty of YouTube channels and Twitter accounts, and there's so many security professionals just willing to talk about this to help you out. I'd be willing to bet even the people here on the call can just answer questions like offline. If you want to just send me a LinkedIn, right? Be like, hey, I have an SMB in this industry. What do you recommend for this technology? I'm happy to help that with that. And I'm sure Jim could too, right? Like a lot of us are willing to help because we're in one giant ecosystem here. Like it's not us in silos. We're trying to do the right thing for the entire world. We're trying to win against cybercrime. So let's help each other.
Jim, any comments on that?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I mean, we're all in this together. I mean, we're not here in silos. We're here to help people. So, you know, especially the SMB market, that's the lifeblood of America, you know? So, I mean, we have a big stake in the game.
Hey, so one question that just came up about compliance. You know, and it talks about, you know, compliance with a framework-based cybersecurity program will become a requirement for obtaining assurance in the not too distant future. And there's a lot of talk about compliance is going to be required for a lot of businesses as it relates to cybersecurity. Do you want to put, you know, maybe your fortune teller hat on and maybe look at the future as to the role you think compliance plays in small businesses and the effect that may have, you know, both positively and negatively?
Well, all right. I mean, I'll just start. I'll say, you know, as a security professional, like I can't be like, no, it's you don't need compliance, right? But you know, the thing is, so if I were to predict, I have heard a lot of these things, and I have heard different standards, and you know, the federal government was looking to mandate. But again, it depends a lot, not to get political, but you know, on the administration, how the economy is going, et cetera. Personally, with things going on, I wouldn't see that in the near term where it was a mandate, especially for the SMBs. Again, this is different than if you're an SMB and you're in healthcare, well, you're going to have to comply with HIPAA. Or if you are an SMB, and we have these that are actually registered entities on the stock exchange, well, you're going to be doing NIST, right? So there's going to be industry specific things that will always be paramount. I don't know if I would foresee, other than some of the basics like we have, like for PCI, and but you know, it probably would be a good idea, but I don't know if there would be a standard for the SMB market that would come out in the near future. Again, just looking at kind of the political landscape and the economic landscape. But my hope is that we can use some of the existing frameworks. So, for example, Naomi mentioned, you know, the book, which has some great information. There's also, you know, the NIST for the NIST standard for the SMB. It's a great framework, I think, to get started. And there's a lot of other things in place. So I would say, you know, whatever you do, though, it all aligns to some of the basics. You're going to find, whether you're a, and I mean this, I've worked with both, whether you're a #3 global bank or you're a 100-person SMB working on, you know, Main Street, the basics are going to be the same. It's just the difference is the scale, the complexity, the number of resources, and some of the things we talked about today, and also we have in the presentation, are going to be the same really for all industries and sizes.
I will add a quick correction there for anyone who wants to work with the Department of Defense. By 2025, you must be CMMC certified. The January, I believe, October 20th, there it is, thank you, Google. October 20th, 2025, you must be certified if you want to do business with the Department of Defense. And I honestly think that more things are going to follow from that. Like, we're just going to see more federal privacy bills, for example, that we all have to comply with. I think it's coming. I think privacy is a human right, but we're going to end up seeing a lot more. I think starting with CMMC, go ahead and just Google it, CMMC. And I don't know if there's anything particular for small and mid-sized businesses, but unfortunately you do have to be certified, and there's quite a large framework to follow. So
yeah,
it is interesting. You know, one of the MSPs brought up that they are assisting customers with their convergence to CMMC, as they are not only defense, they work with defense contractors, they're writing applications for the defense community, so they know they have to be CMMC compliant, and some of the MSPs are actually providing that service and that capability for them.
And I do want to just be really careful when we say certified, that's different from compliant. So certified, you actually get an auditor in there to certify you being compliant. Being compliant just means that, oh yeah, we're compliant, right? Like, so, but certified, that's a whole different ballgame. That requires money, time, resources. So prepare now for 2025 if you plan on having contracts with the DoD.
yeah,
Right.
and just for the benefit of the people, so the DoD contract. So if you were a 5-person organization that was doing DoD contracting, boom, you get this standard, and it deals with CUI, confidential unclassified data, so like non-top secret data. But if you hit that standard, there's a certain level, and you could have up to 130 controls that you have to put in place that have to be audited and certified against. And it's an interesting challenge because there's not even enough auditors to go around, but this standard is coming down. I'm glad you brought that up, Naomi, because it affects everybody. So there could be some trickle from this. So anyway, it's for DoD contractors now, but it's an interesting standard anyway, if you want to take a look.
Yeah, it's interesting. And CMMC is a good framework, I would say, but yeah, it's a little overkill for some businesses. I work for a small mid-sized business. They do HR surveys, and they have to be CMMC certified. It's kind of ridiculous. Like, we just have one small contract is only worth $2,500, and we have to be CMMC certified. Like, yeah, but you know, but that's the balance. That's the risk. Again, understanding how much money you want to spend on this thing, which might cost $100,000 versus winning a contract that's worth $2,500. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Maybe just cut out that contract, right?
Yeah.
So really start thinking about it. But the time is now. If you do plan in the future to have these contracts, the time is now to get CMMC certified.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Well, yeah. Okay.
What I was going to say was, you know, we've got a couple of minutes. We have one more poll question. You know, I'd really like to just go back to and set the stage of, you know, if you're a small business owner or a C-level executive of a small business and you don't have an IT person, you know, what are some simple things that you would, you know, just to kind of reinforce? What would you tell them to do? How would you tell them to get started? And to give them a chance to kind of take a few simple steps to move in the right direction.
Well, all right. I mean, this is gonna sound like a shameless plug from a guy who's been in consulting for over 20 years, but just bear with me. Maybe, and Naomi, maybe you could back me up. But if you don't have the resources, right, I think you need to take a step back and see, what do we need to do to be either compliant with customer regulations, federal regulations, et cetera, or just good practice. Having an initial assessment done by a qualified person, I think, is a great place to start. And then from there, you could expand it into outsourcing aspects of your information security or even technology program, and go from there. But I think at least having an intelligent conversation with someone who's been in the field for a long time to say, hey, what would you recommend? How would you prioritize this? Because again, it's based on time, budget, effort, and risk. And just to get an outside perspective, again, assuming you don't have the the staff or the time to do it in-house.
Yeah, I was gonna not plug for vCISO services like on my own, but people like me, we're happy to help. You just reach out to us and be like, I just have 30 minutes of questions. Like, go ahead. Like, I'm not going to charge you for 30 minutes, right? And you can also start building your network of security professionals who might do this, right? So if they have a side business like I do, vCISO businesses, VCISO, you can search for people around you. Start building that network. Maybe you can get some free work out of them. But essentially, you're looking at like an hourly rate. You can contract them for a month or so. I charge $100 an hour. I don't think that's a lot. I've heard of vCISOs charging $300 an hour. I think that's a lot. But depending on how much they're willing to spend on their time or whatever, and how much effort they put into it, you're looking at between $100 to like $250. I think that's a normal range. Is it worth it? I think so. Again, balancing that risk.
No, I appreciate your perspective. As I said, Alan Alford at TrustMap said, you ought to figure out what devices you have that are exploitable, and you ought to decide whether they're, getting back to your point, are they connected to your critical assets? And if they're connected to your critical data, you better go fix them. And if they're not, you better transition where you're going with those pieces of it. He suggested implement multi-factor authentication, and he said you ought to do just a little bit of training and education. And the other thing that, Chuck Brooks and one of the others, you talked about Gary's book. Todd Fitzgerald wrote the book, The Ciso Compass. It's got a lot of wonderful things in there. I would recommend people take a look at that as well. But he talked about, you just better find out in this day and age with everybody working remote and everybody in a hybrid workforce, what new devices are either showing up on the business network, or now what new devices are showing up that might be a part of your home Wi-Fi that you weren't thinking about, because now you have some corporate device that's now being used on a home Wi-Fi, connected to a home printer and all sorts of IoT devices that are now likely opportunities for people to get into those environments. So those are all things to think about. I would like to remind everybody, and then I'll give our speakers one last second, but I would like to remind everybody, if there's a particular topic or a particular speaker that you'd like us to get on this agenda, please let us know, reach out to us. We are very, we've had Ron Ross, and we've had Tony Sager, and we've had Jim and Naomi and Todd Fitzgerald and Chuck Brooks and Brian Hurd, and we've had people from the MSP radio and the like. Bradford Wilkie from CISO last week, senior advisor to the new director. If there's a topic or a speaker that you're interested in, please let us know, and we will get them on this agenda. This is all designed to be public service announcements. It's all designed to, have all boats rise with the tide. And we really want to just thank everybody for participating today. And Naomi and Jim, I'll give you one opportunity to kind of just, say goodbye, and any thoughts, and anybody that wants to get connected to you, through our website or through LinkedIn, we'll make sure we pass them along as well.
I'll start real quick. Hey, if anyone here is hiring for just junior level employees, I'm telling you, there is a need for new defenders in cybersecurity. So give someone a chance, someone hungry to learn and do something in technology, right? Give them some IT things to do, because we really, really need to start focusing on our supply and our pipeline of talent. So please hire somebody with potential. That's all I ask for. Just look for somebody with great potential and hire them. Give them a chance, please.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to say it was great being here, and we also put a couple of tips and some of the things we spoke about as far as good practice standards and other tips for SMBs in the presentation. We didn't run through it, but it's in there, so you could take a look at it. And if you have any questions, just ping Naomi or I on LinkedIn or send us an email. Happy to answer any questions.
Perfect. Well, thank you everybody for your time. I really appreciate it. It's important that we end on time. Give everybody that are on to their next meeting and their next event that they have. So thank you for your time today. We look forward to having you on the next session, and let's connect on LinkedIn. Thank you both, and thank everybody for your time. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Stuart.
Take care.